Welcome to my Full Life and Faith Leaps podcast with me, Tiffany Jo Baker, where we help you experience God's power and rest in your purpose and progress as you move forward step by step in all the things God has called and created you to do at home and around the world. Hello, y'all, and welcome back to my Full Life and Faith Leaps. We are coming in with part 2 of dealing with darkness when there is a hellhold on your life. And if you missed last week, you could listen to this one, but go back because we are sharing the story, the healing journey, the almost surprising it's true story of Jay Henderson's life and what Jesus has done in it. TJ, thank you so much for coming back and doing part 2.
I'm excited to be here, Tiffany.
Well, you'll hear all about how God connected TJ and I a few years ago at episodes, so I won't go into that. But I do just want to read more about TJ, so you know a little more about who she is and what she does, because we kind of just jumped right into her story last week. She's a wife, mom, author, teacher, and seeker of truth. Her and her husband, Mike, and they're just adorable. They steward land, cattle, and horses. They've been entrepreneurs in the agricultural world and called into agency work for the kingdom of Jesus Christ, a work that was born out of TJ's journey to freedom from human trafficking, satanic ritual abuse, and mental and emotional programming. And we just scratched the surface of that healing journey and that story, your story, true life, real life story of you dealing with the darkness that had taken hold of you. And you kind of came to this place in your life where Jesus showed up and kind of tapped and said, "Hey, sweet daughter of mine, I have something more for you." And with him went through this journey of healing. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about that today. But for those who are listening, the scripture I mentioned in episode 1 was John 10:10. The thief has come to steal, to kill, and destroy, but I have come that you might have life and have it to the full. The full life that I love to talk about here on this podcast. And so Satan is the enemy of our souls. Satan, his purpose is to steal, to kill, and destroy. So if you're listening to this, and I know, TJ, people might be listening, or they listen to the part 1 and they're like, I think that might be me, but I don't know. I think there's stuff in my past, but I don't know. I think there's something in my generational line that I need to deal with so that my children and my children's children don't have to deal with it. I think that there's something going on in my mental health that's not just physical, that there's also a spiritual component that that needs to be dealt with. What are some other indicators, or what are some ways that people, or things people might be experiencing that could indicate that they're dealing with something demonic, or they're dealing with an attack from Satan who's trying to steal, kill, and destroy?
You know, those are, you and I have talked, that those are deep waters that I've had to go into, deeper than we can go in just this a little bit of time. But from my own testimony, I knew that I knew the farther I got down the road in my walk with Jesus. I didn't grow up in church. It was very much the opposite. Had a deep, deep desire to know Jesus, because there was just such a desperate cry in my heart to be well, to be whole. And there were things hidden from my memory that were causing that desperation within me. So my own testimony of beginning to recognize that there's a darkness here in my life, that Christian counseling isn't helping, that meditating on God's word isn't helping, you know, doing all the things going to church and worshiping God. In fact, I was getting worse. And so that was affecting my mental health too, of okay, if everybody else is doing this and their life seems great and they are in love with Jesus and they look full of life and joy, and it's not working for me, what am I doing wrong? And Jesus, in his mercy and his grace, just little by little began to show me that the reoccurring physical health problems, the dreams I was having that made absolutely no sense, that were reoccurring, the waking up in the morning crying and not knowing why I was crying. None of those things were getting better. In fact, they were getting worse. And there were different spiritual, mental afflictions I was having, of anxiety, fear, isolation, disruption in my marriage, where I'm like, Jesus, I don't know what these strong feelings are inside of me. You know, it feels like it all has to do with Mike, my husband, but I can't sort it out. I don't know where these strong feelings are coming from. And I can tell you, without God's divine intervention, when he did, we would not still be married 33 years later.
I think that's such a powerful point that you made, is having strong feelings that you don't know where they came from, triggers that you don't know where that came from, feeling like you've experienced this before, but you haven't, and you're not sure where that came from. Those kind of things. And you also mentioned you were doing all the right things, all the things, going to church and praying and declaring and seeing a Christian counselor, but getting worse instead of better. Those are very clear and practical indicators that there's something else involved. We're made spirit, soul, and body. And it's this very complex, beautiful, I can't describe it. I don't have the words for it. But we can't not look at any part of us, because it's so entwined and it's so together. And when we are on a healing journey, and like you said, physical stuff, and you go to the doctors and you don't get answers and you get worse, they don't know, and you realize eventually you get to this place where like something more has to be here.
Right.
We're missing something. I was just talking to a friend, and she went to a training and she realized she doesn't really have memories before the age of 12. Those childhood traumas and what can come out of them, and how Satan attaches to them and attaches lies and core lies and assignments on them. It's a very, very real thing. And more people are dealing with this than know they're dealing with this. So if somebody's listening and they're like, wow, I can hear parts of my story in her story and in her experience. What would you say to them? What were some of the keys to your journey for your healing, that you could offer, maybe advice or pointing people to help them get free and get whole as well?
The story coming to me is the story that was just The Chosen, the show The Chosen, just did an episode on, which is the woman with the bleeding issue. And in so many ways, I relate to her. She had spent all her money and her time, and she had no answers. She was still in a very desperate place. Um, and it was only Jesus.
Yeah.
Jesus was the only one that could heal her.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the place I was in.
Mm-hmm.
There was so much desperation that it was Jesus. He is the only one that knows us individually,
Mm-hmm.
that he knows our stories.
Mm-hmm.
Because I went through the long season, like 10 years of Christian counselors, and then I moved up to Christian psychologists, well-known ones, and then demonic deliverance. Jesus made super clear, like I mentioned in Mark 5, that
Mm-hmm.
that was a step I had to take. Went through that process and was better for 2 months.
Mm-hmm.
And then the falling apart really, really happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been in such desperate places of Jesus, you're the only one that can help me.
Yeah.
Now what do I do? And I can tell you, Jesus does show up
Mm-hmm.
in those desperate places. And so I would have those episodes of being on the floor, rolled up
Mm-hmm.
in a fetal position and not able to move for hours and just sob
Mm-hmm.
and have no idea why I was sobbing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, my story is extreme.
Mm-hmm.
There are more stories out there like mine than people
Yes.
realize.
Yes, for sure.
So then after I'd seen all those people considered specialists from one end of the United States to the other, I had to step into the waters of, there are fragments of my mind,
Mm-hmm.
smaller states of me that hold stories that are going to have to be told.
Mm-hmm. I just went to a training to help learn more about inner healing and deliverance, and we were talking about our soul and our minds and our hearts. And I also, my education is in counseling, and so I have a master's degree in counseling, and I had learned about multiple personality disorder, right? It's in the DSM-4 back in the day when I don't know where we're up to now, but and now called dissociative identity disorder, DID. And in this training, the facilitator was talking about DID because a lot of people who are going through inner healing and deliverance find that they have parts of them that are disassociated, that they're experiencing DID, whether that's internal or external. And he was like, this is not a disorder. This
Love
is,
that.
yeah, he said, it's not a disorder. He said it was God's plan B for how to deal, for our soul to be able to deal with situations beyond our coping abilities.
That's so good.
And so, especially when we're children, and he said, especially before the age of 7 is what he's experienced. When you go through these traumatic times, you don't have those coping skills as a child, or even if as an adult, whichever. But most people, when they're younger, is their original first split. And so the soul is able to split, to disassociate in order to cope, in order to deal, and they can take on different personas, different personalities, and like you said, hide that story. So it's compartmentalized.
Yeah.
So you don't have to feel it all the time. You don't have to deal with it all the time. And that was actually out of God's grace and goodness, is to allow us to be able to do that. But his plan A was always for us to be whole. And so when we get to that place where we can integrate and those parts of us can be healed and know Jesus and get whole and become whole again, it's what more people need than they realize. And that's where a lot of those amnesiac, I don't know how to say that word.
Amnesic walls. Yeah.
Yes. Those times where you don't remember.
Yeah.
Chunks of your childhood, or even before the age of something. That could be because of these coping mechanisms and because it was just too great to deal with it. And I don't know, there's so much more I could say about that, but even better than me about how God just wants to heal every part of us. Those parts that get triggered, those parts that have been coping unhealthily, those parts that of us that are still kids, and the parts of us that have stories, and those parts of us that we still like have those dreams about. Anything that you would like to say about all of that I just said? I know you probably could say so much.
I could. There's so much of my own personal testimony in that. And I was so afraid to step into those waters. I love what you said about that it is not a disorder. It is God's given way to deal with extreme trauma.
Yeah.
And my case was extreme. There's just no way a child can cope with such deep darkness.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's everybody's stories are so different, and there's just not one formula.
Yeah.
There is no man on earth that has one formula that can address everybody's story.
So true.
And Jesus, he showed us that so much. And, I think of the woman at the well, and he sat with her and he named her story. And so many times I'm like, Jesus, you could heal this deep darkness within me. You could shut these doors that the enemy keeps kicking down because he has legal right to. And I do talk about that in the book, the spiritual legalities. And as time went on, I just began to see that Jesus cares about the truth of our stories. And he wants our stories to be known, not only to us so we can be free, but to be a testimony to the world of how he sees, how he knows, how he wants to heal and restore and redeem.
So you've written a book called Becoming Untethered, and it's your part of your healing journey from this extreme trauma, from this dealing with darkness, from all the attacks of Satan, and how Jesus has been getting you freer and freer and wholer, and has done miracle after miracle. True. But like you said, your story is extreme and it's different than anybody else's because we all have different stories. But there are some principles that God uses through these kind of waters.
Yeah.
So do you want to tell us just a little bit about your book and what are you hoping people will get out of it?
Well, chapters 1-4 of course, it starts out with a phone call, you have to start out with God and end with God. And that's how the book is laid out. But 1-4 is more my personal testimony, my story, my very long, complicated journey of finding all the freedom I needed and how God showed me that step by step. And then the rest of the book, 5-10, is what I learned in that process and the journey I had to take. So I wanted a clear direction for people to be able to follow of no matter the depth of darkness you have faced, that this is the way you may have to walk through your story to get free. And, of course, one of those pieces we've already talked about is deliverance and inner healing, to begin to name the pieces of your story and to begin to find those pieces you don't know and name those pieces and those stories. And then you step into spiritual legalities of, okay, if Jesus paid the price for all my sin, why do I have to deal with spiritual legalities? And that's a deep conversation too. And it takes you back to sin and transgression and iniquity. Some of us have so much iniquity in our bloodline from being our those before us, the generations before us, being involved in satanic ritual abuse, the Masons, even the Mormons. And there's so many religions out there and things that have put spiritual tethers on our life.
Yeah.
And for the generations to come. So dealing with those, the courts of heaven, and why I had to learn about the courts of heaven. And the courts of heaven has become a beautiful place that God has allowed me to understand, to be able to walk in on behalf of others for them to get free as well. And then it's really a call to the church and a call to spiritual leaders and to the young generation of know the truth.
Yeah.
You have to know the truth. You have to know the truth of what God says, the truth of your story, and the truth of how you're going to get free. And don't be afraid to name the truth. If you see your family going to church week to week, Sunday to Sunday, and living like hell in between, somebody's got to stop and name it.
That's right. Yep. Yeah. That's so good. And so y'all, I will make sure to put in the show notes, the information for TJ's book. It's on Amazon. But especially, I know you feel especially a strong call to work with and to, help and train and consult with, pastors and spiritual leaders and those who are leading others. So y'all, if you are in that position, if you are a pastor, if you are a ministry leader and you're like, I need this and my people need this. A lot of churches are so ignorant to what's happening. And it's so easy to stay in our little bubble of what we think church is and just maintaining a comfortable chaos.
Right.
and Satan's like, yeah, good. Stay there. Just stay there.
Is it Hosea that says, my people perish for lack of knowledge?
Yes. And especially in this day and age, y'all, if you're on social media, you see the darkness that is being exposed, the things that are coming out that the media is finally starting to show.
Yeah.
And there's so much more involved, and TJ has lived a lot of that. And that's what her story is about. And so, y'all, such a time as this is for us to get enlightened, for us to get some knowledge, for us to get to know the source of where we need to go for the answers, which, like you've said, is Jesus. And if he's done it for TJ, he can do it for you. He is no respecter of persons. You don't need a degree. You don't need a silver spoon. You don't need to be born with a silver spoon in your mouth. You don't even need to live where there's in the middle of a city. TJ lives in the middle of a cattle ranch.
I do. And I have no college degree, just saying.
And y'all, if you would just wait till you read this book, and if you would just, I mean, it's just phenomenal.
Thank you.
Well, TJ, we could talk forever, and I would love to talk forever. But I just personally want to say just thank you. And I will get emotional, but just thank you. Just for just what you've done personally for my family, for people who are close to me that I know that you've walked with, for doing the hard work for you and your family and the generations to come. And then for doing this book and writing it out and getting it out there, because I know you've dealt with spiritual warfare to get this truth out. And so just thank you on behalf of so many for and your husband, Mike, and your children who are in this with you.
Yeah, they are.
We're better, so much better for knowing y'all, and just appreciate and love your family. And I can't wait to hear what God continues to do with this book and with your story and with your family. Thank you so much for sharing again and coming back and doing part 2.
Thank you for all your encouragement, Tiffany. It's you've been a cheerleader on my path, and I am grateful for it.
I'm so thankful. So thankful. All right, y'all. Well, thank you for joining us. I will also be including TJ's website and her Instagram, so you can follow her, get to know more about what she's doing. And if God puts somebody on your heart or your mind that needs this truth, please share it with them too.
Yes.
All right, y'all. We'll see you next time on my Full Life and Faith Leaps podcast. Well, friends, thank you for joining us today on my Full Life and Faith Leaps podcast. If you enjoyed our time together and are taking away a nugget that has inspired your soul and success, would you share this episode with a loved one who could use it too? And if you haven't already, take a moment to rate and review this podcast and help me help others fuel and fulfill their faith journeys. Until next time, I'm Tiffany Jo Baker, a 3-time surrogate, speaker, and strategizer who loves to help you birth your God-given dreams at home and around the world. Now go do all the things God has called and created you to do with the grace and gifts God has given you.